Hello everyone, and welcome to our webinar focusing on search procedures and technology in mental health care. My name is Colin Robertson. I'm Senior VP with Metrosense, and it's a pleasure to be able to host this webinar today with Roland Dix and Jim Laidlaw. For those of you less familiar with Metrosense, we're the leading provider of advanced magnetic detection technologies. Our ferromagnetic detection systems are keeping people safe and enhancing security in over 50 countries around the world. Before handing over to Roland and Jim, and especially for those of you for whom this is your first Metrosense webinar, I have a few housekeeping items to cover to make sure we all get the most out of our time today. Firstly, today's session will be available on demand after we finish. Just follow the same link as you used just now, and in the email we'll send you after the session. Of course, please feel free to share this with any of your colleagues who are unable to attend today. I'll now quickly take you through the various parts of the screen in front of you. Starting on the left side is the Q&A window. I'm sure that you'll have many questions for Roland and Jim today, so please enter them here as early as you can. The window in the center of the screen is where you'll see the slides throughout the webinar. If you'd like to change the sizes of any of the windows, just use the controls at the top right corner of each window. To hide or redisplay any of the individual windows, just use the buttons at the base of the screen. At top right, we're pleased to provide you a number of links to resources related to our subject today. You'll find here a link to Metrosense Healthcare Security Resource Center, where you can also access on-demand versions of all of our other webinars and other mental health care safety and security content. Now, I know that some of you will be looking to obtain a certificate of attendance for this webinar. The yellow button highlighted here will enable you to download your certificate. You need to have watched the webinar, though, for a minimum of 40 minutes before doing so. You can download and print at the end of the webinar, and there will also be a link in the email that you'll receive a few hours after we close. The final window, lower right, gives you a brief biography of our speakers today. Roland Dix is a consultant nurse in psychiatric intensive care and secure recovery. He's an approved clinician working in the UK's National Health Service and was awarded the Royal College of Nursing's RCN Fellowship in 2014. He has published extensively on psychiatric intensive care and acute mental health care and is the founding editor-in-chief for the Journal of Psychiatric Intensive Care. Dr. Jim Laidlaw is a consultant psychiatrist for the UK's National Health Service. Jim has worked in community mental health teams, open inpatient wards, prisons, and secure forensic wards. He was a member, too, of the National Clinical Reference Group on Low Security. Jim has published widely on searching patients for restricted items, treatment for severe depression, and mental health law. He is also deputy editor of the Journal of Psychiatric Intensive Care. Roland and Jim act as consultants to Metrosense through Mental Health Connections. We have a lot to cover in today's session, so let me hand over now to Roland and Jim.
Thank you for that, Colin. We've got a lot to get through, so I'll introduce myself as Roland, and also with me is Jim.
Hello, everyone.
So we'll press straight on. The content of what we're going to be covering today are specific sort of search and practice issues that are based on cross-sector experience. So this is mental health focused, but much of the wisdom we'll be drawing upon comes from other sectors, like the transport industry and night economy and elsewhere. We're going to be looking at evidence-based searching and looking at some experiments and research that we've undertaken. We're going to be covering technology. The predominant focus today is going to be weapons detection as opposed to drugs or other contraband items. We will be covering that, but focusing specifically on weapons detection. And in these days of COVID, we will cover what we think we know up to this point anyway about safer searching in the context of contact contamination. Some further clarity on the evidence base we'll be making reference to is a specific randomized controlled trial that we conducted for weapons detection. We've undertaken a variety of experiments to try and determine why some things are more successful than others in terms of searching. We've contacted and been engaged with specialist security equipment providers to see what else might be on offer. We've talked to colleagues across sectors, as we've mentioned before, particularly prisons, transport and entertainment. For example, the issues that you might find in a entertainment venue for preventing contraband coming in. And we're going to be talking, and my colleague Dr. Laidlaw will be specifically thinking about the Mental Health Act Code of Practice, which is the legal framework within which the UK operates. Two other considerations beyond the law are, for the UK, the Care Quality Commission, the regulator for quality, and this would be replicated, I'm sure, across different countries, but in a different way, and the Health and Safety Executive and issues surrounding that. One brief word of caution: some of what we'll be showing today will identify specifically how it is, for example, a knife may get past a handheld scanner, and the detail of how some of those issues transpire. So it would be unwise to make widely known exactly the method of getting past weapons detection equipment. So this is a professional audience, so we would ask everyone to bear that in mind in terms of who you might share some of these illustrations with. Just to put into context how serious an issue this is, there's a couple of newspaper reports there from the UK. The gentleman on the left was tragically stabbed and died from his injuries in a rehab mental health centre in London, and the other newspaper or news item there covers two members of staff that were stabbed within a medium secure unit. This news item is particularly close to us as it covers the tragic death of a colleague of ours within the facility that we work in, having been stabbed by a patient. So this was a particular set of circumstances for us that has been long-lasting in terms of its impact, and one of our motivations for trying to improve practice. One thing that we would put forward in terms of search and security, it can be one of those things that falls low on a priority threshold in terms of all the other things we have to do daily, and I often say search and security doesn't matter until it's the only thing that matters when things go wrong. Some of the expectations upon us around the globe, particularly in the UK for mental health services, are that COVID-19 is with us, and when you search people, that's opportunity for infection. And beyond the newspaper reports I've put forward, there have been fires in the UK, some of those from lighters taken into seclusion rooms that were internally concealed. There have been a number of stabbings, some of which I've pointed out. And for us all, actually, in the modern era, the idea that we should know what is in our wards and facilities and be able to control it is quite a high, if not unreasonable expectation sometimes from the public. And in the UK at least, and elsewhere, there's the issue of the smoking ban and all the difficulties that brings for lighter concealment. Many of us in secure mental health will be familiar with this paradigm for security: relational security, getting on with people, setting up positive environments in a way that people don't want to challenge it; procedural security, the stuff you have around the equipment and the systems in use; and physical security, what's available to you, doors, windows, and your physical environment are the three domains. So we'll be looking at the last two particularly in this presentation. In terms of relational security, more search isn't necessarily more safe. We need to be cautious about overusing search procedures and how that may damage relational security. To illustrate that point, newspaper again item about police stop and search procedures causing significant and serious social unrest if overused. When they might know.
Okay. We're going to be asking you, the audience, some questions as we go through the presentation, just to help us think about the issues and focus, and we'll get the results from these questions as we go through. So Our first question is about what methods of searching are you using in your mental health care facility? You've got 4 options. Please tick all those that apply. And once you've done that, if you click the Submit button at the bottom. Thanks.
Next, we're going to cover the issue of the law. In the UK, we've got the Mental Health Act Code of Practice. Now, while not statute law, it is the standard by which we're judged. I'm aware that there are other jurisdictions probably dialing in, listening in. So most liberal democracies will have a set of principles that are very similar, and my colleague Dr. Laidlaw will now go over some of the principles in the UK Code of Practice.
So other relevant legislation within the UK, and specifically where we're working in England and Wales, is the Human Rights Act. You've got various articles. Article 8 is around privacy and personal physical integrity. That's a qualified right, so with good cause it could be interfered with. Article 3, however, which relates to inhumane and degrading treatment, is an absolute right and cannot be interfered with. So back to the Mental Health Act Code of Practice, and this is really an issue of proportionality. So when you're searching somebody using the powers within the Mental Health Act within England and Wales, searching must be carried out in a sensitive manner, and it must be proportionate in intensity and duration to the perceived risk. So within England and Wales, the Code of Practice is clear really that units should avoid blanket restrictions, which are rules and policies that routinely restrict a patient's liberty and other rights and are applied to all patients kind of regardless of their individual characteristics. So the Code of Practice is clear that blanket restrictions should be avoided unless they can really be justified as a necessary and proportionate response to risk. So the Code of Practice obviously applies to all types of psychiatric units, including open units, but it's permissible within locked units to have some restrictions, and those can be part of the general security arrangements. But it's important that, again, that these arrangements should be justified in terms of the admission criteria to the unit, and that when there's an opportunity to relax these rules, careful consideration should be given to relaxing them. So the Code of Practice requires units to have a search policy, and this slide is really a bit of a recap. It's important that that policy promotes and maintains a therapeutic environment, that the search policy is lawful, so within the Code of Practice, and that searching is proportionate and really involves the minimum possible intrusion into a patient's privacy. So on to routine searches. The Code of Practice does not promote routine searching, but does give allowance for it happening in certain units in certain circumstances, but basically requires there to be clear evidence that the patients within a particular unit are dangerous, and that there is therefore a self-evident and pressing need for additional security. One additional point is, however, that sometimes routine searching isn't necessarily that helpful in maintaining safety because people learn the procedures and how to maneuver around them. So we're now going to consider capacity and consent. In UK law, you have to ask permission before searching somebody. In the UK, if somebody lacks capacity to give permission to be searched, they still can be searched if they will just generally cooperate with what the staff are requesting. When considering room searches, it would be usual to keep the patient informed of what's going on. There may, however, be circumstances where it's necessary to search a room without involving or informing the patient, but the rationale for that decision should be carefully recorded. Although it's not particularly common, there are circumstances where a capacitous patient may decline to be searched. There are provisions for managing the situation, which are that a senior clinician should be contacted, and if they're in agreement, the search can go ahead. It's also clear that the searches should not be delayed if there's a clear reason to proceed with them, particularly if there's an immediate risk to safety of the patient or anyone else. So searching without consent is and should be a rare event. In these rare situations where there's a search without consent, there are provisions to maintain the dignity of the individual being searched. To summarise, there are limits within searching, and more searching, more security doesn't necessarily make for a safer environment. So there are always tensions between control and therapy and restriction and liberty, and these should be remembered when one is thinking about optimizing search within a unit. This slide is simply a summary of the key points around the legal framework with particular relevance to the UK. You're welcome to read this at your leisure.
And here we can see the poll results from the previous question. Now we're going to consider some of the more concept issues about informing our population, the people that we're aiming not to bring things in, what it is that they shouldn't be bringing in, what sort of approach we should use to prevent the need for searching in the first place. Good information is key. Clearly letting your population know what it is that we expect by means of posters and other information leaflets is a good starting point. There's an example of a common one in mental health units. This is an example of one that we proposed for Reykjavik services in Iceland, which also includes the idea of scanning as opposed to the usual rub down and other types of search. We're going to move on now specifically to the practical issues associated with personal searches. During the video you're about to see, keep your eye on the hand wand movement. There's lots of weird and wonderful ways of using a hand wand, but basically a good way to conceive it is, imagine it's a paintbrush, you need to cover the whole body by painting it red. There are differences between men and women in terms of rub downs and use of handheld equipment. We're going to show an illustration for a male search, and coming up next will be a video over which there'll be some narrative for the issues.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to have a search then. Okay. Can I have your consent?
What we're going to see in this video is a rub down and wanding procedure not dissimilar to that you might see in many facilities, possibly in the mental health context. There's a reason to believe this gentleman needs searching.
Anything in these top pockets? No. What's that, Roland?
And the emptying of the pockets reveal something that we're concerned about.
You know these are suspicious substances, Roland. You shouldn't be bringing them onto the unit. You are aware of that. We have had this discussion before. Because we
so now we're going to move on to the actual wanding. The technique with the wand is largely the same, principle being that you cover all of the body. It generally needs to be within 25 millimeters of the body, or following the body line as closely as possible, often without touching it. Shoes are coming off on this particular search on the basis a small wrap of suspicion was found, and that would lead you to believe that areas easy to conceal like shoes are of interest. Obviously, if the intelligence was for something the size of a laptop, you wouldn't necessarily be looking into shoes.
One force finish for your jacket, if you can hand them to Paul. Okay. One afternoon rope is
now the rub down technique and wanding techniques, they vary to some extent across a range of people that might use them, but they all follow similar characteristics. Now, the hand wand on this occasion is going near to the floor, and we've chosen a location in which the floor does not alert on the wand. On many facilities, because there's steel reinforcement in the floor, the wand will alert next to the floor. Not on this occasion, though.
Lovely. Okay, everyone will have to do a rub down technique, okay, now?
All right.
Okay, so I just want to let you know what's happening. I'm just going to feel around your collar and then your sides.
Again, with the rub down technique, some variations in the way it's done, but generally the same.
You enjoy this, don't you?
Not at all, mate, not at all. All part of the job, keep everybody safe.
Again, a lot of hand contact with the search subject. And if you think about the time this takes as well, it's quite a good period of time to do it. I mean, often an opportunity for further consideration of what might be going on for interaction and reading signs and signals.
That's it, I'll just come inside there.
And then finally tuck it into the waistband.
Back in the shops. Another job? Anything more? No. Okay. Thanks for being so cooperative, Roland. Thank you very much.
Okay. No problem at all.
And that came past the hand wand, the rub down, and the entire search procedure.
So the scenario in the video is a real experience that happened to us, where a patient got through all of the procedures as you've just seen, having concealed a knife, and then went on to stab a fellow patient. And these are some of the headlines that were associated with that event. As we've said before, there's nothing quite like a desperate and horrible situation like somebody being stabbed in your facility, to bring everything into question in terms of practice procedure and how things really ought to be developed and what the difficulties are.
Now it's time for our second question. Have you had experience of failing to find a restricted or prohibited item concealed on a patient when using your standard search procedure? There's 3 possible responses. If you could click the one that's most appropriate and press submit. Thanks.
So if we assume there's no technological solution to that video, and with the only way of getting to that concealed knife is actually to find it, physically find it, let's just have a quick look at what that actually means practically. How far do you have to go? And we might define this as our highest level of search.
Okay,
So this video picks up where the other one left off, and we're assuming now that we're pretty convinced that there's something there that we're worried about, and we're pretty worried about where it might be. But we don't have any technology that can find it at this stage.
Just a vest, that's skin tight.
So we're going through the layers now.
You can see like skin tight or anything.
Okay, lovely. If you could hand that to Paul. Could you pull your trousers up a little bit?
When
you're not hiding anything down there.
When the trousers are pulled close, you can still see no outline of anything if it's well concealed.
You've wanted me, you've searched me.
Yeah, well, I'm still really suspicious about this, Ron. We have got some intelligence.
So the considerations now really are, how far do you go and how much evidence or concern do you need to justify what's going to happen next?
Just drop your jogging bottoms down for me, please.
What, in front of these 2 guys?
They're okay, they're not going to take any notice. Lovely. And if you just pull your boxes up, keep your scrotum covered.
So the search procedure here is trying to do the minimum amount to find
is could you just
where
grab your
it is,
scrotum and just pull it to one side for me, please? Okay. I can see you've got something now, Roland. Okay. What I'd like you to do now is tell me what it is.
Well, what, you mean that?
Yes.
Well, that's for cooking.
Okay, what I'd like you to do is take it out and place it on the floor,
You should have
please.
said it, if that's what you meant.
So the idea there is to try and reveal the areas that would commonly be used for a high-level concealment. Difficulty with this is having the justification to go that far would have to be...
Well, I feel I ought to make a quick apology for that video, as revealing as it was, all in the interest of safety in science. But there's another big point to make, actually. As frightening as all this is, the vast majority of patients aren't interested in bringing lethal weapons into psychiatric facilities, although we're not really interested in the vast majority. Often we're interested in the one that does. And here we've got the results from the second of the two questions asked. Okay, we're going to look at the different technologies available for metal detection. Very common technology used in handheld devices and walk-through devices is continuous wave detection. Basically a send and receive system. Magnets create a magnetic field in a metallic body which creates eddy currents, and the hand wand can hear the echo from its magnetic field. An entirely different system is ferromagnetic or magnetic anomaly detection. What this involves is at the center of planet Earth there's a big ball of molten iron, gives us a geomagnetic field everywhere around the Earth, and this detection technology looks for ripples in the magnetic field around the Earth. So I, in a light-hearted way, sort of describe that as it's looking for a disturbance in the force. It can see ferrous material moving, stuff with iron in it, through the magnetic field of the Earth, and it can see the ripple, metal in motion. So this is some of the stuff we've tested in terms of experiments leading up to our randomized controlled trial. We looked at rub downs in detail. We had a good look at a walk-through device, handheld equipment, and the ferromagnetic detection system. For our experiments, we did some real-world tests. So what we did is take £5, wouldn't know what that is in dollars actually, I don't know, $6, and to see what we could buy within a couple of miles walk from an average psychiatric hospital. And there's a range of stuff there that you can see that we could buy, including the two on the end, which are ceramic knives. First point to make about any detection technology: nothing is foolproof. Good intelligence, understanding the situation and knowing where stuff is, because you've got good insights and good relationships with people to find that out, is incredibly important. But we're going to get specifically now into how you detect stuff that you otherwise wouldn't know was there. So we're going to pick up now roughly where the other video left off. So we've got the concealed knife. This time we're not using handheld equipment, we're using the ferromagnetic detection technology.
This video picks up assuming a different approach after the one that required removal of clothing. So we can see we're going over the same situation again with a hand wand, and on this occasion we're just doing the lower half of the body because this is the place of interest.
Okay, I'm just going to switch this off. Still got a strong suspicion there,
so on the basis of, risk-assessed intelligence and understanding, Andy is still concerned that there is something concealed, so we move to the other detection device, and what we can see is very quickly we're getting our 3 or more lights, which indicates quite significantly something there. Again, moving the part of the body where you think the item is located. The groin area is a common concern. Very clearly alerting, and things progress to the point where it becomes
you don't hand it over,
more likely the person's going to sort of be candid about what
okay,
they've got.
Can you place it on the floor?
Hey, this wasn't for me. This was Bob's cooking. Not for me.
Okay. No, I don't want it. You can place it on the floor for me, please, and just step back.
So you can see from that the technology involving ferromagnetic detection was far more effective at finding that concealed knife, and we'll explain more about exactly why that is, and run some more experiments leading up to the randomized controlled trial. For use in the randomized controlled trial and in the pre-trial experiments, we simulated body cavities, rectal insertion, by building a simulation out of pork. We took some basic measurements, and for your average 100-kilo male, we calculated if you were to rectally insert an item, there would be around about 150 to 170 millimeters of flesh between the target, we'll call it in this instance, and the detection device.
In this video, we're showing the handheld device alerting very nicely against a knife within the specified distance, concealed internally or surrounded by flesh, and we lose the detection ability principally because the device cannot get within the specified distance of the target. Again with a lighter. Once concealed, we lose our detection ability. Very small item, needs very close proximity to the device in order to alert, almost contact in this case actually, in this sort of single experiment. And not surprisingly, we lose ability to...
What we can see there is that the flesh, too much flesh between the target and the device causes it to be concealed from the device. So we're running the same experiment using the ferromagnetic technology.
This video we're going to look at internal concealment, so again using the pork simulation for an internal cavity. So a variety of items concealed in the pork, starting with the same knife actually that's been used all the way along, that placed in the right way was undetected by the hand device, and moving through a variety of other items. Again, we see the smaller items are more visible to this scanning technology than the hand device. And the thing of particular interest actually is the head of the razor, which could be used in self-harm potentially, which is a very small amount of material really for detection. And again, we're not really concerned about the beep, we're more interested in the lights that indicate the presence or otherwise, and 3 or more in close proximity would be something of interest.
Our experiments suggested that if you've got a handheld device, a common one, then you will likely find items of the size in the picture. If you calibrate a walk-through device to some of its higher settings, you can certainly add smaller items, say of the size of that knife, and slightly smaller, that got past the original handheld device. Using the ferromagnetic technology, you can add all that to it, much smaller items, including actually the ceramic knife on the end, which, while invisible, that particular model of knife to the handheld device does alert on the ferromagnetic technology, because it does have material in it, but just not enough for the handheld device to see. Along with handheld devices, we had a very good look at rub downs and ran experiments. And again, if you know it's there, you can find it. But if you generally are sensitive and sensible with the amount of intrusion you'll be using in rub downs and the handheld device, unless it's very poorly concealed or very large, most things will get past a rub down if concealed properly. When it comes down to fully ceramic knives or anything else that isn't really detectable from a metal detection point of view, you're really down to taking off clothing and getting quite intimate in the searches, for which you have to have an extraordinary level of justification, certainly in mental health services. Most people will have procedures for searches, but many of these procedures will not and do not extend to internal cavity searches. Well, many will be wondering why it is that knife got past the handheld device in the earlier videos. So we've run experiments to determine why that is. So if you quickly just talk you through this slide. If the knife is located handle facing forward and blade backwards, which as it would be, often sheathed, then you've got a lot of flesh surrounding the metallic part of that knife. To the outer extremity, at the back and side, you're going to have up to 80 millimeters. If it's tucked in right at the top in a male, where the top of the scrotum is, if your scrotum's around 80 millimeters, and believe me, we've found that out up to a point, and it can be around 80 millimeters, what you find is your handheld device cannot generally get to within the detection distance of the target in order to alert, unless it's thrust right up into the groin area. Yeah, so another video showing how you might use the walk past device, and there are various ways, and we know of better ways now than shown in the video to get maximum performance from it. But this might be a sort of standard return from leave scenario that you might see in a mental health facility.
In this scenario, it would be quite a common situation where somebody's coming back into the facility from a short period of unescorted leave or a longer period. So divest basic contents of pockets and then walk past. Now, in this situation, we're assuming it's winter and there's lots of clothing. So that clothing needs to come off in stages. Scanned individually.
Okay. So put your jacket down here, right?
And given the size of that signature, see the full range of red lights.
Okay, there's still something else on you. Could you take that top off?
We're probably going to keep going until we work out what that is.
Okay. Nothing on there. Anything else you could think of, Roland?
Can't think of anything.
Okay, if you can go in front of it again for me. Right, it's picking something up.
Oh, hang on a minute. Yeah, no, I was going to book this in. It's all right, it's all right. Because I just got to sign it in and out. It's a pain. So.
You have?
Yeah. Sorry about that, mate.
And then finally
Not
we
a
get
problem.
to
If you
it.
put it in the tray,
Yeah.
lovely. And if you can walk in front of it again.
And you see there that the razor was detected. It's an interesting thing because the vast majority of the experience we've had with these sorts of devices is people do genuinely forget. It's quite disingenuous in the video, but nevertheless, a lot of things come in because people have forgotten to hand them in, which can and often are detected in the way shown. Unlike a handheld device which will detect all metals, whether they're ferrous or not, containing iron, you see in the video that most zips, studs, and other bits of metal on clothing are quite often brass, which is invisible to the ferromagnetic detection system, which in fact is quite an advantage because the handheld device will alert on everything, where generally the ferromagnetic device can exclude most things other than what we're often worried about, which does actually contain iron. To test these issues more rigorously, I'm going to hand you back to Jim now, that's going to talk you through the randomized controlled trial we published, looking more systematically at many of the issues that we've raised.
This randomized controlled trial was published in Medicine, Science and the Law, and was a comparison between ferromagnetic detection and handheld metal detectors. So to conduct the experiment, we used real and dummy items that we would not have wanted brought into a secure unit. So in this case, knives, razor blades and cigarette lighters. And on this slide you can see the real items and some partially disassembled real items and dummy items. And here are the items again, dummy items on the left, real items on the right. The double-blind part of the experiment was that the real and dummy items were wrapped so that the subjects who were carrying the items did not know whether they were real or dummy, and indeed those allocating the items to the individuals going through the experiment did not know whether they were real or dummy either. Unfortunately, this isn't a terribly clear picture, but if you look carefully at the third knife along, which has got UV light on it, you can see a letter there. So these letters were allocated by the statistician that wasn't directly involved in the experiment and allowed for decoding of the results after the experiment. The reason that we were so concerned about blinding the experiment was just really a concern that if the subjects knew whether the item they were carrying was real or dummy, it might somehow have affected their behaviour and made it more obvious to the searchers perhaps what they were carrying. So here are the two subjects who took part in the experiment, men of similar size and weight, who'd undergone training to perfect their hiding technique for weapons, which they were concealing in the groin area through multiple passes in front of ferromagnetic detectors and handheld metal detectors. So the other part of the experiment was using pork to simulate body cavities and then inserting the various real and dummy items into the cavities and passing these in front of ferromagnetic and handheld medical detectors multiple times. So here's an example of a cigarette lighter. We don't know whether it's real or dummy, being inserted into the body cavity made of pork. So in total, the randomized controlled trial involved 258 passings of real or dummy items in front of detectors. As you'll see from the results, the ferromagnetic detector was 100% successful, so it detected all the real items in both pork, which simulated body cavities, and the subjects where the item was hidden in the groin area. The handheld metal detector, however, only detected 5% of real items on the subjects. This is really indicating that it's quite possible, if you know how, to hide metal items in the groin, and also that the handheld metal detector did not detect any of the real items when they were in the simulated body cavities. As our statisticians said, with results as stark as this, we didn't think that paired analysis with McNamara tests would add anything to the overall analysis of the results. And now I'll hand back to Roland for the next parts of this presentation.
This is an example of a Metrosens detector deployed in the entranceway of a secure mental health facility. Another example, this time in the mobile stand in the airlock of a psychiatric intensive care unit. Yeah, moving on from Jim's description of the randomized controlled trial, I'm going to talk a little bit about searching in the infection control environment, particularly in the context of COVID.
But just before that, it's time for our third question, which is, with the coronavirus pandemic ongoing, what's your level of concern about infection transmission during your current patient search procedures? Again, this time there are three options. If you could click the most appropriate and then press submit. Thank you.
What we know about COVID-19 at the moment is contact contamination is a big source of infection. There's continued debate about aerosol transmission, although it's pretty safe ground to assume that those that are COVID positive will be infectious potentially through contact. Now, if you look at these pictures, this is a new piece of research that we're currently at the writing up stage for publication. It's not in this instance specifically concerned with searching, it's more concerned with physical intervention and restraint. But the picture on the left is illustrative of a person who may be COVID positive, and the UV illumination you can see is where the infectious material may be on their bodies, including the hands, arms, torso, and facial area. The picture on the left is a picture of somebody that, the picture on the right is the picture of somebody that's just been involved in an episode of restraint with the infectious person, and you can see how the contact contamination has moved. So this isn't specifically concerned with searching. This is different research, but it illustrates the point that if you're going to rub that person down with the UV material that you can see on the left, you're likely to have much of that material in contact with your body, as you can see in the picture on the right, which is from an episode of restraint. The hands are of particular concern. We're further looking into how you might, for example, rub someone down with diminishing the amount of contact transfer, or what cleansing or other PPE might be effective in that scenario. But for now, a standoff searching method, including scanning devices of any description actually, but for those that don't require physical or close proximity contact, are perceived as a good advantage at this stage. This picture is showing the amount of contact contamination from an episode of restraint, as I said before. Now, this is unlikely to transfer in a search context in this way, but the arms, hands particularly are likely to pick up contamination. So at this stage, we're going to look further at other research into this, but we would be recommending that cleansing is crucially important, and some of our preliminary research, I can say at the moment, seems to show that good use of Clinell wipes could be effective in dealing with contact contamination following an episode of searching. But this is preliminary research that we're waiting now to formalise in terms of results and publication. Finally on this, this is a picture showing a spit simulation, which was part of our previous research, actually caught very effectively in this example by the fluid-resistant mask. This results from a simulated spit from one person to another. Again, with searching in close proximity, if people are loud in their talking or actively target spit and spit at people, that can cause a significant concern. So again, standoff searching as far as possible, or even diminishing the extent to which you need to search people in the first place, has good advantages in the COVID environment. Headlines then for searching and COVID. Rub-down procedures bring you into close contact. There's virtually no other way to describe that, and that can and will involve contact or potential for contact contamination, particularly from the chest and arms area. There's opportunity for aerosol transmission at close proximity, and distance scanning, or better still, trying to target searching both procedurally and in terms of episodes of searching to the absolute necessity, is probably the best thing to be doing within the COVID environment. And on this slide we can see the results from the third question. Yeah, drawing near to the end of our presentation this evening. Intelligence, knowing the environment, knowing the patient population, knowing the strengths and weaknesses of your systems is by far the most effective method of maintaining a safe environment. Obviously, technology and different procedures and techniques assist that, but we can't illustrate enough that knowing what you're looking for and knowing what's there through going and finding out and having procedures to do that is essentially important. Coming towards the end, it's worth actually ending where we started, remembering that searching has to be proportionate. It has to be in intensity and duration consistent with the risk. So the more evidence you have of high risk and the more concern that can be demonstrated, the more intrusive searches can be. So, you know, you've got your standard procedures. You might have some suspicion that can take you a certain distance in terms of search procedures, and there's reasonable grounds for a more intrusive search, and then for the higher level searching, there's very significant grounds. In terms of non-contact, non-invasive, quick scanning, they often give you the least restrictive option and are more readily justifiable as least intrusive. Yeah, one of the big takeaway comments that we might put forward is we very often concentrate on how it is that we think we can make our environments more safe. And I would emphasize again, and I'm sure Jim would too, that good relationships gives good security, but a good way of framing how vulnerable as an environment might be is if you put as much thought in how you might beat your own security system as you do as implementing it. That's usually a good framework to consider how things need to improve or develop. Okay, final concluding points from us then. Knee-jerking is something that you often see, and I've seen myself, where there's been a very sort of dramatic event of some sort, and then search and security procedures are sort of expanded and bombarded onto a situation which is often pretty unhelpful in terms of improving security. It should be avoided, really. In the mental health estate, with our current use of technology and procedure, are we parked in the right place? This is forever a journey rather than a destination. There needs to be continued developments and revisiting. How would we judge ourselves if something went wrong? How would we reflect on our own procedures and technology? And I suppose, as important, how would others judge us in our efforts to maintain safety for everybody? And finally, eBay contains a fascinating array of things and items designed specifically to beat security, to get things into prisons, into nightclubs, and is our approach consistent with the methods currently in play to beat security? Are we using the best technology to keep pace? Right. Thank you, everybody, for sticking with us. That's our webinar today. We're looking forward to some questions. So that's thanks from me.
And thanks from me.
Well, many thanks, Roland and Jim. A hugely informative session. I'm sure that everyone will agree. Now, we've taken quite a lot of time for that, but let's answer at least some of the questions we've been asking over the last 50 minutes or so. And the first question I'm going to focus on is something that we were talking about right at the end of the webinar there, And the question is, the contamination work is interesting. Is this relevant to the use of hand wands, or do they not touch the patient?
Okay, Jim, do you want me to go lead off on that one?
Yes, please do, Ro.
Yeah. It's a good question. I think with COVID-19, the debate as it currently rests is that what we know for sure is contact contamination, physically touching virus-containing material and then touching your own nose or mouth, is a very high contamination method. Aerosol, actually in the atmosphere, is debated, but there's been a recent letter to WHO from over 200 scientists saying that it's also in the air when people speak, it's aerosol size less than 5 microns. So if you don't have to touch someone, you have an advantage, and the hand wand doesn't touch anyone in the same way as the scanning device, the ferromagnetic scanner, doesn't. However, when you're wanding somebody, you need to be in pretty close proximity to them in order to wand. So the possible transmission from smaller droplets through speech or aerosol generation or smaller particles in the air is higher than if you're stood back 1 meter and then better still 2 meters. So contact contamination is reduced if you use a hand wand, but it isn't as reduced as much from further distance scanning where the person undertaking the search is stood further away from the search subject. So that would be my answer to that.
Okay, next one. Has your research or recent experience indicated any increase in the prevalence of mechanical restraint in mental health settings attributed to staff anxiety regarding COVID?
Okay, probably another one for me. I think the COVID-19 pandemic for mental health services across the world have caused a lot of anxiety. Most mental health units across the world, and this has been well reviewed and described in the professional press from a variety of countries, your mental health unit is designed to achieve everything other than social isolation. It's designed to achieve connectivity between people, group activity and engagement. And obviously there are many people, or at least a good proportion of people in inpatient services, that will not be in a place where they can cooperate or easily accept social distancing. So anxiety is the right word. Now, my experience in the UK, talking to people from around the country, we certainly do know of examples where people have been in seclusion or in isolation or separated from others in quite a restrictive way because of COVID-19 potential for infection that they might not have been in the absence of COVID-19. But the question asked specifically around mechanical restraint, so far anyway, through my contacts and dealings in the UK, if by mechanical restraint we mean handcuffs or in some ways bound mechanically, I'm not aware of any significant increase in the use of those sorts of measures, which are, by UK standards, very unusual anyway. I think in the United States and Scandinavia and a number of other jurisdictions, mechanical restraints is favoured more as an intervention than in the UK. But obviously in the UK we have restrictive interventions too, but that particular form isn't overly common.
Thank you very much. Okay, next question. And this is one for me, actually, I think. Can the MetroSense device detect small implants like loop recorders? I think I'm right in saying, Roland and Jim, you don't have any direct experience of this using your systems. Is that correct?
Yes. We've not come across implants particularly as an issue for the scanning device. That's not to say it wouldn't be.
Okay. So let me answer from a MetroSense viewpoint. So likewise, I'm not sure that we've actually got direct experience of specifically loop recorders. but certainly our ferromagnetic detection systems can detect implanted items if they contain ferromagnetic material. And the nearest one that I could put to your loop recorder, your cardiac loop recorder, would be a cardiac pacemaker. And we're absolutely sure that the Metrosense devices detect cardiac pacemakers. Indeed, we recently carried out a controlled trial, a published trial with Mayo Clinic in the USA, and we found I think it was about a 99% sensitivity of the device to the detection of cardiac pacemakers. So I think the answer is most likely yes, but we would need to see the device in order to check that. I'd be very pleased to talk about that further. And now we're pretty much running out of time, but let me just go for one more question. And this is, what techniques would you use for search if you were concerned at potential violence from a particular patient?
I'd probably lead off on that one too. Violence is an issue in mental health services, certainly in the UK. There's around 60,000 assaults in healthcare generally, and about over half of those are in mental health care. So it's certainly an issue. When it comes to searching, if somebody has a propensity to be violent or they're in the act of being violent and aggressive, we can assume in those circumstances that they're not being cooperative. So really your options are to keep that person as far as possible separate but engaged in de-escalation from everyone else. Some other different jurisdictions will have different ways of doing that. And when the acuteness of the situation is diminished, then when cooperation is more readily available, that's the time to proceed with a search. In our experience, if you don't have to touch anyone, and if you don't have to rub them down, and you don't have to go through those lengthy and intimate processes, you generally can achieve more cooperation with a quick scan. But if someone's being actively aggressive, well, your choices are twofold, really. One is to isolate the person as far as possible and de-escalate that situation until you can achieve some cooperation to proceed with the search, or to do the search in the absence of consent, which is a very, very troublesome and difficult thing to have to do. So I think that a lengthy answer, but a difficult question, really.
Many thanks. Well, I'm afraid we've reached the end of our time and need to bring the webinar to a close. So just a couple of final reminders from me, if I may. Firstly, for those of you who are looking to download an attendance certificate, click on the yellow certification button down at the bottom of your screen now. Or alternatively, there will be an email that you'll receive probably about 4 hours from now, which will provide you a link to do that. Secondly, for those of your colleagues who are unable to attend our live session today, do encourage them to join the on-demand webinar at any time. You can do that using exactly the same link as you used just now, and please forward your invitation on to them. And finally, from me, there will be a very short survey popping up on your screen when we end. This will just take 30 seconds, probably even less than that, for you to complete, and will help us to make our webinars even better and more informative in the future. So I urge you, please do complete that for us. So it just leaves me to say thank you once again to our speakers, Roland Dix and Dr. Jim Laidlaw, and to all of you online for joining us today. So until next time, thank you and stay well.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.